it just, when it became about Fort Hood and there's something different about Fort Hood and something bad about Fort Hood, that's when I really was like, this is unfair. And I never felt personally that, that anyone came to our defense. Mm-hmm. We had a lot of senior leaders who were either relieved or suspended, pending investigations. And at the end of the investigations, they were found not at fault of anything, but then weren't allowed to go back into command. I mean, it was just one thing after another like that for the first, like I said, 6 or 8 months of command. So that was tough to deal with. And brigade command is different than battalion command. I mean, it's a much bigger organization, and driving the culture it's just that much more difficult. So
absolutely,
when these young soldiers were hearing about how bad it was at their duty station, it's hard not to believe it. So they're looking for reasons to there's Fort Hood again, and everything that happens becomes, even though most of the stuff that was happening everywhere. Not that it was necessarily good, but it wasn't particularly Fort Hood.
Yeah, it wasn't nuanced to just Fort Hood. It just happened to be,
right.
That's where the spotlight was at.
Right.
Like command isn't hard enough.
Right.
Ian, thanks so much for joining us here on the show, and we're looking forward to kind of diving into your background and everything, and I know you guys have a relationship, so Sean, it's good to have you back in studio, brother.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a very long time. I tried to get you on the show a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And think you might have still been in at the time, because we talk all things Cav, and I just knew you were a perfect candidate to come on the show, because your story is great. The way that you tell the story is great. For those of you that don't know, Colonel retired Palmer was my squadron commander for 3rd Squadron, 1st SFAB. A lot of history about the SFAB. We've had extensive conversations about it, but when people say I'd follow this man into battle, I did.
Well, you're legally obligated.
Yeah,
at the time, but
thanks for taking that away from me. But, I did it.
I'm just trying to. You're raising the bar really high for this podcast.
I did it willingly and with bells on or spurs on. But it's probably the pinnacle of my career, and just being with you, and then all the other leaders that we had.
We had a great team, across the board.
A group of professionals that the Army took a chance. Yeah. And a whole bunch of people raised their hands to try this SFAB thing out, and our group was it, man. That was great. Yeah, but great. I'll let him get into that story.
Well, when was it that you separated then?
So I officially retired November 23. Okay. So coming up on 2.5 years ago.
So you've been working on the beard for a while then.
I was thinking about that on the drive down here, because
looks good.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. It was, as we all do, like, as soon as I retire, I'm going to grow a beard. It was just this running joke with the family.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I hit terminal leave, I started growing. Because like a lot of us,
I'd never grown a beard.
I'd never tried. Maybe 2 weeks on leave here and there, but nothing serious. And then it came in, I was like, I kind of like it, and more importantly, my wife liked it, so it's here to stay. So
now it's one of those things with your kids, when they see you without it, they're like, "Dad, put it back on." And
also, funny part to that was my oldest daughter got married last July, and
damn, you don't look that old.
I'm sure we'll get into that. I'm gonna be a grandpa in May.
Well, congratulations!
Really thank you. But for the wedding, she wanted me to wear my uniform. And so I had to shave, and my 10-year-old, who does not like change, wouldn't even look at me. Like, she was not a fan. And I've been told more times than once since then, like, I'm never allowed to shave it again. So it's just become, and it's funny, that dynamic. We have 7 kids. Oldest is 24. Yeah, exactly. And the youngest is 8. So we have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old who aren't really going to remember much about the Army.
Yeah.
and the older ones, it's all they really knew.
Right.
So the difference in my youngest son a couple months ago asked, "What's a deployment?" And the rest of the kids just went, "Are you kidding me?" Like, so it's funny. So that was just one reflection of the whole thing. She wants the beard, and that's just the way it's going to be.
I can totally relate with the younger, older kid. I only have two, but the youngest daughter doesn't remember because when she was born, I was getting closer to retirement and everything. Whereas the oldest one remembers not just the PCS moves, but the inner moves, like when you go from housing to apartment to a house to a, and so she remembers the multiple school changes and the whole bit. And it's interesting how the kids can explain more about as a dependent. Having been a dependent, all of us, well, we'll get into your story, but you end up having a very different experience than your, parent that served.
Right.
And they have a great story usually as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting, and over the last couple of years since we were retired, it's just been seeing those different changes in the how the younger two are going to grow up so much different than the older ones.
Yeah,
they're going to be so much happier.
It's different.
Yeah,
it's different. I mentioned the resistance to change. I mean, the older ones were just so resilient because they had to be, and with the moves and the deployments and everything else. And the younger two have lived in the same house for almost as long as any of the rest of them lived anywhere. So they're very comfortable, and it's just different. Yeah.
To be able to, the youngest ones to be able to go to school in the same community all the way from, say, elementary through high school, it's going to be a very different experience for sure.
For sure.
Where was home? Where was it you came in?
So I grew up just north of Youngstown, Ohio, in a small town, Cortland.
My wife's from Youngstown.
No kidding.
Yes.
Youngstown, or somewhere?
Well, Youngstown, Mahoney County. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And then has family across the border as well in Pennsylvania, Newcastle.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to have to talk after this for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of mafia ties there as well. So.
Yes. Well, she should read. Boom Boom Mancini wrote a book.
Get out.
And I'm totally dating ourselves by talking about.
That's a boxer.
Yes.
Very good.
Early 80s.
Was he middleweight or middle heavyweight or something?
He was a middleweight.
Yeah.
But he was famous, at least at the time, for he killed a guy in the ring. But he was from Youngstown, so he's local pride and the whole thing. But in his book, he talks about his family. This guy's name's Mancini, the ties of the mafia in Youngstown to Buffalo and Providence, Rhode Island, and how it's just the environment he grew up in. But I grew up about half an hour north of there in Trumbull County.
Yep.
And in Cortland, Ohio, which is small. So I usually go Cleveland to Youngstown to Warren to Cortland to kind of orient people to where I'm from. So,
no, I know exactly where you're from. Having driven through there quite a bit in that area. What's crazy is that I'd go back up there probably about once a year to see her side of the family. And the roads in Ohio will be like potholes and shite. And then you'll drive across the border and Pennsylvania is like smooth and everything's great. And so it's very different, especially if you're coming from, what's out to the west there of Youngstown? And there's an airport there that you can fly into, sometimes cheaper than flying into Pittsburgh.
Well, it's the Youngstown airport, but there's a Vienna. You talking about?
No, it's airport or another big city. I'm thinking of
Akron.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you drive from there to Youngstown, it's just nothing but potholes there, like every other.
Well, in defense of my home state, I'll say that
good job, Rob. I'm set all over Ohio.
No, but that part of the state is in the snow belt.
Yes, and that's why the salt.
They get pulverized.
Yeah,
the roads get pulverized up there.
Yeah.
Hey, sorry. Remember that one time? Shit all over. OH.
I was not doing that.
No, I didn't take it that way. That's John stirring the pot, which I expected.
Now, Pennsylvania's got really nice roads, but Ohio's shite.
I flew up there a couple years ago from Fort Hood, or I can't remember if it was Hood or Polk. Anyway, flew into Pittsburgh because you could go either Cleveland or Pittsburgh and get home pretty quickly. And as soon as I crossed the border from Pennsylvania and Ohio, it was snowing like crazy. It was like at the border. It was crazy.
Yeah.
So I'll put that on the snow.
All right. So you grew up, went to school there, but did you end up going to Youngstown State and becoming a Penguin, or?
No, I didn't. Okay. I did ROTC. I did my screening for ROTC at Youngstown State.
Okay.
At the time, it's changed over the years, but it was more of a commuter school then. I went to Notre Dame. there's a mini story in there where I was going to go to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. My dad had gone to Carnegie Tech before they merged with Mellon University, and I was going to go there and play football. And I was all set. I had a girlfriend back home. It was 2 hours. It was a great deal. And I won't say it was on a whim, but I wasn't one of those guys that grew up like, I want to go to Notre Dame.
Right.
But I applied because when you get your ROTC scholarship, and Sean knows this, you get on a like mailing list for every school that's got an ROTC program in the country. And my athletic director at my high school, who was kind of a mentor of mine, said, you should go to Notre Dame. And why? I knew the football. I didn't know anything else, but he said, it's a good school, whatever. Didn't really think much of it until I got my brochure from Notre Dame ROTC. I applied, didn't think I was going to get in, made plans to go to Carnegie Mellon, and then I got in. And I was still like, really this is kind of a good deal to go to, it's Pittsburgh, it's right down the road. And till all my buddies were like, I will kick your ass if you don't go to Notre Dame. So I said, okay, well, I'll go and visit. I'd never been to the campus, went up to the campus, and I was sold. Great thing about that was, that decision, as with any college decision, changed my life. I met my wife there, and the rest is history. So I went to Notre Dame ROTC, commission added there, and was on active duty a week after graduation at Fort Knox.
So one of the guys who helps us back in the background here loves Notre Dame like a major. So he would have loved to have been here and had this conversation for sure. But
we call him Civilian Dan.
Yeah. I wasn't aware that when you apply for ROTC that you get like inundated with all the ROTC opportunities. It makes sense. Once you get in tight inside the market or whatever, that they want to try to attract you to their schools for sure.
Yeah, it was flattering because it was like being a recruit for football. Every time I came home, I had a stack of brochures.
You get courted. Each of the brigades are fighting for you. Each of the schools are.
And some of the schools were waiving the cost for the application, and some of them, because at the time the scholarship didn't cover room and board, and it was a percentage of your tuition, so they would cover the rest of it to give you a full ride, and that was tough to pass up, but it was the right call. So
yeah. Youngstown State. The reason why I asked you that as well is because that's the home of the Stoops brothers as well. So a lot of Kentucky and Oklahoma, all these types of things. So these a big family. Their father was a coach there.
Yeah,
as well.
In fact, Tom Pavlansky, who was my defensive backs coach in high school, he's now the Poland high school football head coach. He and I keep in touch, and I actually just saw him about a week and a half ago. His dad and the Stoops dad were like best friends.
Is that right?
Which I didn't know until he and I were having a phone conversation a couple months ago. But yeah, it's great football.
It's a small community area around there as well. So one family, you're probably connected within at least 2 to 3 degrees or something.
Well, like you said, your family, your wife's family's Italian, and it's very ethnic. It's very diverse.
Irish, Italian, a lot of big both.
A lot of Eastern European, Greek.
I was going to say
Czech,
Croatian, Czech.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, so it was a cool place. It was a cool place to grow up.
I never knew that.
Yeah. Kind of a hodgepodge there, and that's where a lot of those little communities started. Was like a couple families would come in, and the next thing you know, they'd start telling all the relatives or people back home, and then they started creating. Well, and they had the railroad that was there. They had the coal mines, steel, different types of things that were all within that area, within say 100 miles that people were getting attracted to. So, all right. So when you took your commission, what did you decide to? What branch did you decide to go into?
I was an armor officer.
You chose that.
I did choose that. It was I did not come from a military family.
Yeah.
Both my grandfathers served. One served in World War II. The other one also served in World War II and Korea. But I didn't know either of them. One passed away before I was born. One I was, I think, a year and a half old, something like that. So it wasn't like there was a military influence in my family, but I kind of felt drawn to it. And in retrospect, I placed that with the fact that I hunted all the time with my dad. So I was outdoors, loved being outside. I played team sports since I was 6 years old. And I think just the combination that made it appealing. Considered applying to the academies, but didn't follow through with that. And then had an experience. I know a lot of states have boys' state. I don't know if they do here in Georgia, but it was basically like a leadership type thing between your junior and senior year of high school. And you do like a mock government, and you have to run for election, this whole thing. So it was like a week-long thing that I got to go to at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. And while there, they did a military demonstration. So I was already thinking about applying to the academies. In fact, the guy who was our, I don't know, supervisor, chaperone, whatever, the adult on the floor was getting ready, as we found out later, that he was getting ready to go do his plebe year at West Point. So I talked to him about it and some other, but the first day we were there, as I was talking to some of the people about maybe going to the academies, they did like the ROTC demonstration and the big assembly at the end of the day. And there's guys like rappelling out of the rafters.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, yes. So the day after that, the quad, just like a lot of schools, had 4 different dorms that looked exactly the same. So I was walking to what I thought was where my room was, and it wasn't. I was in the wrong building, but I walked in, and it was, the lobby had all of the recruiters set up. So I walked over to the Army table and just chatting with them, and he asked me about test scores and activities and grades and stuff like that. And he hands me an ROTC scholarship application. And I didn't know what ROTC was. But by the time I got home, I'd had most of it filled out, sent it in, which I got an early cycle ROTC scholarship. So by November of my senior year, I knew I was on scholarship, which opened up a lot of opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Oh, yeah.
Going back to the Notre Dame thing, I was never going to Notre Dame on my own dime. So that application and subsequent scholarship opened up that opportunity so I could, eventually go to Notre Dame. So I tell that story all the time because I was walking in the wrong place, just happened to run into this guy, and it completely changed the trajectory of my whole life. And that's not an exaggeration. So that's how I found Army and Army ROTC. So back to your question, when I started ROTC, I didn't know anything. So I got familiar with the Army loosely through ROTC at Notre Dame. And the ROTC program wasn't like a lot of schools. It wasn't terribly intense. They were very sensitive to the fact that it was an academic school. And so the requirements weren't that high for ROTC. So it wasn't like I was joining the Army. Right. But through my experiences and getting to know my friends who had families that were military, and then doing, ROTC camp is when I learned I liked it. And eventually, not initially, but eventually, got pretty good at it. And I decided I wanted to do combat arms. So my first, I don't remember how you had to rank order them, but it was armor and then infantry and then whatever else. And you had to include everything on there. So, but I was lucky enough to get armor.
Did you see anything like armor around or like introduction, whether it was your instructor or, what?
There was one instructor who was an armor officer, but I wouldn't say that he had a huge influence over my decision. The one I actually had that had the most influence was an infantryman, and he gave me a hard time about picking armor.
Sure.
I just loved history. Yeah. And I loved World War II history and
Patton. Yeah.
Right. And the role of the tank in World War II. And then when you go to ROTC camp, you do branch day where you get oriented to all, and I saw the M1 Abrams, and I was sold. Yeah. And why walk when you can ride, right? Yeah. So
I forgot to ask you, would you like some water?
No, I'm fine.
I noticed that you're the only one not with a drink.
I've been offering him drinks since he's been at the house, and it's
all right. Now, having the historical part of it totally makes sense. Anything combat arms related, obviously, if you're starting to look at the historical aspects. So you went off to, at that time frame, Fort Benning, I guess. Wasn't that Fort Knox? Fort Knox was, okay, when you went in.
Yeah.
What year was that?
97.
Okay.
So
that does make
he went to Fort Knox right when I graduated basic.
Yeah. What month did you graduate basic?
February of 97.
Okay. Yeah. I was there middle of May 97. snowbirded a while doing ROTC, cadre, and then started my basic course, I think in November, if I remember right.
Then we all three went through Knox.
Is that right? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Because the BRAC wasn't until 2008.
Yeah.
7 and 8, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, which combined it. So that's why I was trying to remember, like, when was that exactly that the cutoff actually happened? So how long was your course there? Because I don't even know what the officer side.
I want to say it was 4.5 months.
Was
16,
it? Okay.
18 weeks, something like that. Yeah, because I started that in November and I finished in February.
Were you guys over at Disney Barracks?
No, we were Schedule Hall. It was on main post.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember some of the other.
It's where all the NCOs.
Kind of. Yeah, it was where the
okay.
NCOs was.
Yeah. Okay.
If you remember where the rocker was, it was near the rocker.
Yeah. You leave Disney, you go down the hill, go back up, and then all the NCOs.
Okay.
Right.
I only went back there when I guess it became more like HRC, and then in between, never went back. So, you know, when you're in OSIT, you don't really get a chance to go explore other than the bowling alley that was close by Disney Barracks, and you know that was about
I did
it.
BNOC there.
Did you?
Yeah.
So we moved to, so I retired to Lexington, Kentucky, and not related to Fort Knox, but I was on terminal leave the last couple months in Lexington already. So I decided that even though there were some local places where I could have gone to get my retiree ID card, we decided to go to Fort Knox. So I took, the kids that were at home still and my wife, and I went to Fort Knox to do that. And I was showing them around, and I think almost every place that I either lived or had classes was gone.
Like building wiped out.
Either the building was wiped out or it was getting ready to be wiped out or it was being used for something else. I mean, it was crazy. And
it's almost sad.
Disney Barracks is the only thing that's standing that resembles anything from the late 90s.
But Disney Barracks is still there.
Yeah. Same red brick building.
What are they doing? What's inside there now?
CTLT or CLT, the Cadet Leader Training.
Okay.
LDAC.
Yeah.
That's where they're doing all the cadet. That was the full circle moment for me, because when I was the Auburn SMI, I went there for CLT. That was the year in Disney Barracks, in the same footprint of my basic
full
training,
circle.
when I found out I made the list for the academy.
Wow.
My brigade sergeant major called me and told me that I made it.
Yeah, that's funny.
So
when you got out of your training and stuff, did you get to select where you wanted to go next, or how did that work for officers?
Just like anything else. I mean, you had a preference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we all had that dream sheet.
You get to vote, right? In fact, I put Korea as my first choice.
Did you really?
And I got Fort Hood, Texas. And I thought Korea is guaranteed, because at the time it was a PCS and it wasn't rotating units.
Do they have M1s over there now?
Not anymore.
Okay.
they did.
No.
They
did.
Gary Owen had all the.
Yeah. But it was, I was single at the time. I'll go train, spend a great year in Korea, go overseas, get some experience, and then come back and go where, and then I'll get a choice of assignment after that. But I got Fort Hood. So.
All right.
Which is a theme here.
Yeah.
Fort Hood will be a theme.
It's always a theme.
So you end up at Hood. It's your first duty assignment. How was that?
I loved it. I really did. Yeah. I had to adapt to the weather. I've been growing up in Northeast Ohio and went to college in Northern Indiana. It was hot. In fact, the first summer I was there, I had gotten my platoon, and I think the last week of June, we started about a 2-month run in the field.
What unit?
I was in 366 Armor, and Alpha Company 366 Armor. And I'd never been so hot in my life. I mean, being in the turret of a tank, riding around the
there's no air conditioner.
No. We didn't have A2s, so we didn't even have that. But what was I going to say? I lost my thought about that. Oh, it was at the time, it was the hottest summer on record in Central Texas. So Here I am, white, pasty Ohioan, dealing with the Central Texas heat. But yeah. So, but it was great. I mean, we were in the field all the time. Our brigade was the Force 20, I think what they call it, Task Force 21 Brigade or the Force 21 Brigade or something. We were testing all the digital equipment. that became FPCB2 and Blue
Were you
Force
4th ID then?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it was in 4th ID. So but we were in the field all the time, which was awesome. And it was, I spent most of my time as a tank platoon leader and a scout platoon leader later in the field.
Well, no, those were all 105 at that time frame then? When
we were 120s. We had the A1 AIM tanks.
Yeah.
So there were some additions to the main M1A1.
Where they switched to a 120 smoothbore?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
the 4th ID was on the east side.
Mm-hmm.
1st Cav was on the west side. And it was split right down the middle.
Yep.
And the 2 water towers. But then you had Battalion Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
And it would run the length of all of the brigades. So if you were 1st Cav, you could run Battalion Ave. You ran it to, was it Hood Road? Was it right in the middle?
Hood Road was in the middle. It's now,
whatever.
It's something else now. Yeah. And I just left there and I don't remember.
But you would run in front of all the companies, the troops. It was horrible.
It was. A lot of people there. I mean, it was a huge base. But, first assignment, so it's all I knew.
Yeah.
But as it turned out, my wife was going to graduate school at University of North Texas in Denton, just a couple hours up the road. So that worked out. So it was a blessing that I was at Fort Hood.
Yeah. Did you end up deploying from there?
No. 4th ID was not doing anything, which kind of was a problem for me, because all my friends down in 1st Cav, I mean, this is 99, 2000, so there wasn't a lot going on anyway in Bosnia.
Right.
But that was what was going on, so I wanted to do something. And this is kind of, my wife and I talk about this all the time, because there was a moment when I had moved to the Brigade Recon Troop to take over a scout platoon, and we were supposed to go with the Division Cavalry Squadron to intrinsic action in Kuwait for 4 months. And it was such a big deal that I drove up to Denton to tell her that I was going to be going to Kuwait for 4 months. And we look back on that, we chuckle because of how dumb that was. But that was our life. So no, we didn't deploy anywhere. I left there in the summer of 2001 to go to school. I went to Quantico to do my captain's course at Amphibious Warfare School. So we moved to Quantico after that first assignment. And we were there for 9/11, and then obviously everything changed.
Amphibious Warfare School.
Yeah. 2 years later, no, I was nudging you because 2 years later, 4th ID deployed.
Yeah.
And they kept 1st Cav back.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Because I was on Analog Mountain training when all that stuff was going down, and they decided to push 4th ID. That's when Geraldo was doing all the drawing. That was 4th ID.
That's right.
That was those guys. That was him.
Yeah, all my buddies that were still there were deploying. Yeah.
So tell me about the amphibious warfare, though.
I really enjoyed it.
You volunteered for that?
My brigade. So after I finished my time as a scout platoon leader and I was the XO of the Brigade Recon Troop, I had some time to kill before I could go to captain's course. So I moved up to brigade staff, and because
S3 or
S4 actually. I was
supply.
I was the brigade maintenance officer.
Oh,
which sounds a lot like more intense than it really was. I mean, I worked directly for the Brigade XO, and all I did was watch all the systems to make sure we stayed out of trouble.
Okay.
So I was the conduit for, hey, you've got turn-ins to do, or lateral transfers, or you've got services that are coming up. And I tried to keep all the battalions out of trouble, and I was just providing information. So I just monitored all the systems. I didn't have any real responsibility. And they loved it because they got heads up on stuff that they may have lost sight of. And because I was there doing that, the Brigade XO was happy because our numbers were good, and it kept him out of trouble. But if somebody didn't listen to my warnings, then it was on them. So I wasn't getting yelled at for anything. So it was actually a really good job.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. But I had gotten to know the brigade commander a little bit better than most senior lieutenants because I worked in the BRT. And he was really good. He was a great mentor. In fact, I've kept in touch with him through the years, and he was at my retirement ceremony, as a matter of fact, Randy Anderson. And he brought me into his office, and he said, hey, there's this course that Armor Branch is asking if we anybody that wants to go. It's called Amphibious Warfare School. I'd never heard of it, didn't know anything. And the name didn't imply what it really was. I thought it was like a 3-week HUA school. I would go hang out and, do amphibious assaults with the Marine Corps. That's what I thought it was. And I talked to another guy in the brigade. So he's like, no. He's like, you want to do that. That's a good opportunity. You basically are an exchange officer with the Marine Corps for a year. So I told the boss that I wanted to do it, and then there was a selection process and I got to go. So it was a little bit longer than your typical captain's career course. It was based off of a school year. So we started in August and then we finished in June or July, or no, it was earlier than that. But so it was about 9 months. And I think the career course was still only 4 or 5, maybe 6 at the longest. And it was just a good experience. I got to know, I had a lot of those experiences where I got to serve with the other services. So I was pretty joint even before I was joint. And the first time I really found out that if there's something you can get selected for, that you should do it, because it probably means it's going to be good, and you got selected for it, which was good for your resume. Good for your
absolutely
good for your ORB. So, but it was a great experience, and I've kept in touch with a lot of those Marines over the years. But
how many other Army lieutenants / captains went with you?
I think we had 5 or 6.
Oh,
yeah. I mean,
I didn't think there would be that many.
There was, and we did a lot of exchange with the Marine Corps. That was part of that school. The Marine Corps schools are not like the Army schools in that they aren't by branch. So
that's what I was getting ready to ask you.
Yeah.
Like, so were there a lot of armor guys there, or they're amphibious vehicles. I can't remember what they're.
But they had tankers. They don't have tanks now.
Yeah,
they got rid of their tanks a couple years ago, but they had tanks at the time. So there were a handful of I don't know, whatever their MLS was. Yeah, right. But they had everybody. They had MPs, they had infantrymen, they had their lawyers, their JAG officers. They had everybody go to the same school because they're so small. They couldn't have branch specific jobs. But the way they balanced that was every couple months we would take a couple weeks. They called it OFEC, I think, Operational Field something, where all the combat arms officers went and did combat arms stuff, and all the logisticians went and did logistician stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So at the end of the year, I think it was in February, we went to 29 Palms in California, which, for those if you're familiar with NTC, it's like NTC, but it's north-south, not east-west. But the same terrain, and we did some really good live fire exercises. So you spent a week at Quantico planning, and then you did another week of planning when you got there, because they have their teams, just like we have teams at NTC. Their live fire team would help they kind of coached you into the same plan for everybody.
Yeah.
But this is for safety reasons. But then we were split up into small groups of 10 and then subdivided 5 each, and we did 2 iterations of this live fire, where the first one you were the battalion staff, so you're like the S3, the battalion fires officer, you have 5, and you're doing charts and darts in the back of the track. And then the other iteration, you were the company fire support team, so you were the company commander, fire support officer. They had like the FAC, like the fixed wing coordinator, et cetera, et cetera. It was super cool. So we're on an Amtrak on an OP, and at our disposal, we had a battery of 105 howitzers, a mortar platoon, a tank platoon, a section of Hueys, and then whatever was on station fixed wing, and they're all fighting your plan. And that was very sweet. Yeah, very cool.
That is cool.
Yeah.
Damn.
So we got a full exposure to planning, but also good orientation to the entire Marine Corps and how they do business, because you're working with everybody. In our small groups, we're all mixed up, but still got to do some HUA stuff and fire some live bullets. Yeah.
We've only had a couple of people, I think, on the show that's ever been able to really cross service and go to some kind of academy or school or whatever. And it's always cool to hear the stories, and especially from the guys that did it, like, say, with the Navy, where you're learning something completely different. Marine Corps is close enough to the Army, but when you start talking something like Navy, Air Force used to be part of the Army, but, at any rate.
So my officer basic course was the last time I went to a major Army school. I went to like scout platoon leader course for a couple weeks, but like the professional military education, the last time I went to Army was as a lieutenant. I did the amphibious warfare school as a captain. Then I went to Newport with the Navy as a major.
Wow.
And then my war college, I did a fellowship at the Hoover Institution at Stanford.
Dang.
So like that's why I mentioned that before, because when a lot of guys were, it's not that they weren't qualified to go do some of these other things. They were fine doing the Army thing. And I had no problem with it, but I was like, I'm going to try to do something new. So I always tried to seek out new opportunities or something that was different. And, different people had opinions about that. The line I got a lot was, well, you don't get an opportunity to network with your peers. And I don't know. I didn't.
It's always the naysayers. Whenever you leave, whatever they think the path, your glide path. Hey,
right.
If you don't need 18 months of this, and then you do your time here, and you got to be this.
Yeah.
And anytime you stray from that, you always have people like, you're never going to get picked up for promotion.
Right. Because you're doing it different than the way they did it.
Yeah.
And they were successful, but there's more than one path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you not go Army War College then? Or?
No, that's when I was at Stanford. I did that.
Wow.
And then there were all kinds of different fellowships. Like Rob Montgomery, he went to the Eisenhower School at Harvard, and there's all kinds of different opportunities.
Do you think that's what really, in some ways, set you apart and helped you then in your career? When somebody's looking at it for a promotion?
I don't think it hurt.
Yeah.
I think it helped me just be more well-rounded, and it gave me different perspective. Where, like Sean was saying, I mean, you get that a lot with mentors. If they had gone to NTC as a task force senior after their battalion command, then that's what you should do because it worked for me. And that was true. And most guys that did that were ultimately successful, but there was just a different path. And I think by having those different experiences, I brought different perspectives and was able to think differently about problems and sometimes think bigger than the problem right in front of us.
How did you end up mentoring? I'm sorry.
I was going to say, from a subordinate lens, you see it completely differently because, as a first sergeant, as a sergeant major, you work with the people that did the status quo, that did PME normal, NCOS normal, and you get the same, unfortunately, the same regurgitated type leadership. Mm-hmm. Some of the personality comes out of it, but that. We always say, "Oh my God, I go to war with him, run through a brick wall." There's a method to his madness, right? He would let leaders lead. You knew when you were in trouble if you weren't doing the right thing, but it wasn't your typical do push-ups type of stuff. It was more like the fatherly. You knew he was disappointed. You knew what you were supposed to be doing, and that's not what you were doing, right? I attribute that to the different perspectives that you got from a leadership standpoint. It was treat them like adults. And you act like an adult, you get treated like an adult. If you don't act like an adult, well, I'm still going to treat you like an adult, but we're going to have a conversation about it, right?
Well, and the SFAB was another one of those experiences where nobody knew, myself included, when I was first contacted about potentially going to the first SFAB, I had read some things in Army.mil about it, but I didn't know a lot about it. But when that opportunity presented, I don't think I had a choice. I mean, but my name was going forward as one of the potential armor officers that would get selected for this thing.
Okay.
And I got really excited about it because for a number of reasons. One, it was new and it was different. And I'd like I said, I'd always tried to seek those opportunities, but also that I'd always enjoyed my experiences with partner countries, and that's what we were there to do. So when that opportunity, came through, I was really excited about it.
I like that he's being humble. So the first SFAB, and it's who you are. The first SFAB that nobody knew anything about, you either threw your name in the hat and you got selected, and it was very extensive, and they were very critical about who they were bringing in because the echelon that it was at from a visibility, from a creation
It was General
standpoint.
Milley's brainchild.
Yeah.
So it had to succeed.
Everybody remembers that.
So you weren't going to just put some window-looking commander up in there, right? They were looking for specific people, personalities, background, So, I mean, they say that he didn't have a choice. I mean, you got selected for a reason, right?
I was joking. I think I could have said no, but the more I talked to people about it, the more I was like, yeah, let's do this. This sounds awesome. And then it got even better when we pulled the crew together. And we hurt some feelings along the way. I mean, because we were getting a lot of talent, and because of the visibility of it, and because of the importance that the first one had to do it right, we got the pick of whoever we wanted to come, pretty much to a first SFAB. So that produced a certain culture and team that, was just fantastic.
Well, your military service to this point too, with like serving with other branches and those types of things, was a great liaison. Like, you were demonstrating that before even getting there. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I said, I think the experience of doing those different things was more important than, having it on my, or on my ORB, my officer record brief. I'm falling back in old habits with that. Acronyms, right?
But, we usually talk about that up front.
Yeah.
Forgot to say, no acronym. Yeah.
But it was really just kind of I was well-rounded because of those different experiences.
Yeah. So you were talking about the people that mentored you and the advice that they gave you, but what kind of advice did you pass on to others? That way, your way, or did you try to meet them in the middle and figure out more about the individual? So I'm very curious how you did it.
I think you would have to ask them, but I tried to meet them in the middle. I would be honest with them about where I thought their future was, what's their potential. So that drives some of your career decisions. And sometimes you should shoot for the moon because you need that experience to get over the hump for the next promotion or the next command selection or what have you. And so I would talk honestly about what I thought about that. But I was sensitive to not passing on what I got so often myself, which was do what I did. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say that I did have a lot of conversations, particularly when I was in Brigade Command after being in the SFAB. We had an SFAB right down the road at Fort Hood, and I had a great experience. So I would say that, like, I had a wonderful experience doing this. And if this is what you're looking for, it's a great option. But I don't feel like I ever pushed anybody in any certain direction, because by that time, especially, I'd learned that there were multiple paths to success. So, you could choose any number of things and still be successful in the Army. It's more about you than it is about the assignment. So wherever you find yourself, just do well. Like, work hard and be a good teammate, and those things are going to get you farther than where you're assigned.
I think your visibility, though, to what you experienced is what helped you have that type of clarity to share that as a
I think
mentor.
so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's like you said, it's only what they know and what they've seen in their circle of five or whatever. But you were exposed to so many different opportunities, either through leadership coming to you and you go, hey, you might want to apply for this. This might be a great assignment. Or, like you said, you researching and looking for those opportunities, because once you got the one, it was like, well, maybe I'll try something a little different over here and not go the normal route.
Right.
So, yeah.
People are afraid of the unknown. And then once you get past it, you're just like, oh, this isn't that
They're afraid of being in an uncomfortable position. Not only that, but they want to be able to refer back and go, hey, Sean, hey, I'm in my, second week, fourth week. I'm struggling with this. Did you feel? And if I don't have anybody to reach back out to, I'm like really going out on the plank here, Yeah,
that's why I say that amphibious warfare school experience was beneficial in that way, because I was hearing, like, you're gonna miss out on the education, and you're gonna miss out on the opportunities to meet your peers, and then when I went to my assignment after, and then I was fine. I was able to catch up on the Army stuff, and your network is who you're serving with anyway.
Sure.
So it didn't have the impact that I was told it was going to have. So from then on, it was like, well, why not seek the different thing from here on out? So that's what I did.
Where'd you go after Quantico then?
I went to Germany.
Okay.
And I was on 1st Division staff for a year and a half, something like that, 15, 18 months. The irony you pointed out, 4th ID, was I got there in, I don't know, fall, was it fall? Yeah. No, late summer 2002. And by fall, we were already hearing about Iraq.
Sure.
And we first ID wasn't really in a position at the time to be part of the invasion, because we had a brigade in Kosovo. We had another brigade going to replace them in Kosovo. And at the time it was you had the one brigade of first ID at Fort Riley, and the other three were in Germany. The other two. Anyway, we had a brigade at Riley. So we didn't have the combat power to do the invasion. So the headquarters ended up as the Army Forces Turkey headquarters. 4th ID was there was a plan for 4th ID to invade through Turkey into northern Iraq that got turned off. The Turks weren't playing. So they ended up going around. So, all those buddies I was talking about at 4th ID that were still there were part of the invasion while I was in Turkey watching them on CNN. But, the funny thing was, like, when I was at Quantico, there was a real sense of, we're going to miss it, because 9/11 happened and we had just started the school and we were not going to leave until
9 months. Yeah.
Right. And there was a real sense that, okay, we're going to miss the big one. Well, careful what you ask for. But,
yeah. Well,
so,
it ended up sticking around for quite some time.
It did. Yeah. We got our piece of flesh, right?
Yeah. So when you went over and you did the staff time with 1st Division, you were a captain at that point. What staff did you end up doing at a brigade?
I was in Division G3.
Division 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
what were you responsible for in the 3 shop?
Initially, what did I do in the 3 shop? I mean, it was a lot of different stuff. We had a division operations center. We had one captain who was kind of running that, but I would help. Buddy of mine was doing the division tasking, so I was writing a lot of fragmentary orders, and but by September, I went with our the G3 Chief of Operations to Kosovo to help command and control the transition of our 2 brigades. So we were kind of the division overhead for the 2 brigades ripping out in Kosovo.
At Bondsteel?
Yeah, at Bondsteel.
So I was just thinking, like, division-wise, a captain, like, being kind of low. So I was trying to figure out, like, having been at a 3 shop in a battalion, hearing about it from a division, I was just curious what a captain would be doing.
Well, the division staffs at the time were a lot smaller than they are now. So captains were doing a lot more than you would think of in a division staff now. Not to say captains don't do work on divisions, but the staffs are a lot bigger. So in the G3, we had 5, is that right? 5 majors, and now they're way more than that.
Yep.
And then they're really inflated since that time. So and the G5 wasn't a thing. The planners were in the G3 at the time. So 3 of those majors were Sam's graduate division planners.
Okay.
So much smaller division staff than what we're used to now. But by September of that year, I did the Kosovo thing for all of September. And about halfway through that, my boss got pulled back to help prep for the Turkey mission. So by the time I get back, it was early October, and we were already starting to plan for that mission. So I was fully embroiled in that through Christmas. I think from Thanksgiving until I deployed to Turkey on Valentine's Day. The only day I wasn't in the office was Christmas Day. We were hoofing. So because I was the captain from the G3 that went with the 1 major from G3 as part of the advance party for the division staff. So that's a whole nother experience that might be a separate podcast, but
that's pretty badass.
But we went on
cool.
Advon, and the Turks cut us off from bringing in more people. So there were supposed to be 200 more people from the division staff to come down, and it was maybe 50, and we were commanding and controlling everything that we were doing there with those 50 people, and it was like I was the only captain, and we had 1 major, and there was sergeant first class and a sergeant, and that was it. And then we had the G1 and the G2 and, all these other people.
Right.
Were you working at the airbase? Was it like Incirlik or?
It was at Incirlik. Yeah. It was at the old clubhouse and the golf course that was abandoned.
Oh, wow.
And so we were running division ops out of this little building, everybody on top of each other, including the CG. and it was madness. And I was working my tail off. I mean, my wife and I were just talking about this a couple weeks ago, but eventually those other 200 came down. Well, by the time those 200 came down, I was smoked. Like, I was having chest pains and like working 18, 20-hour days. I mean, it was crazy. But it was my first exposure to deployment and, you know, what it takes, especially when it's austere and making do with what you got.
Yeah.
And it was on, I mean, we weren't out in the middle of the desert. I'm not trying to play it up, but we were in an abandoned building and trying to run division operations. It was wild.
And that was before anybody really knew. I mean, got it. Kosovo, you know, we helped set up like the sea huts at Monteith and stuff like that.
Bond steel was not.
Bond steel was a cakewalk.
Yeah.
They put a howitzer at the front gate of Bond steel for force protection, you know, like there just wasn't a lot
for direct fire.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I think everybody was learning what a deployment felt like.
Yeah, and it was really from that perspective, I learned a lot.
Yeah.
You know, what to pack, how to manage yourself, and it was my first real taste of, hey, you got to balance yourself when you're doing these things, because especially when you start going on year-plus long deployments, you've only got so much energy and so much bandwidth to maintain yourself for that long. So it was my first lesson into that kind of started a whole, you know, and we talked very early about, I had a big family for most of the second half of my career, and how do you balance spending time with your family and doing those things and also maintaining yourself as a leader, and figuring out the things you got to do from day to day to keep your energy up and to stay engaged and stay present and all that stuff. I mean, that was my first lesson into that because I felt it.
Most people were going into those with the energy and the thought that they were going to be able to keep the energy like a JRTC rotation.
Yeah, like hanging there for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then a year later, you realize there's no days off.
Right. Yeah.
Did you get command time right after that?
I did. No, not immediately.
Captain command time.
So we got back so that deployment was 2 months. So I got back mid-April, and I stayed on division staff for about 6 more months after that. And over the summer, we found out that the whole division was going to Iraq for OIF-2. So we get back. I'm still doing division staff time. I moved down to the Division Cavalry Squadron 1-4 Cav at the end of October, early November, right as we're doing our mission readiness exercise. Joined them. I was the S1 for 1-4 Cav, and we deployed in February, I think, of 2004.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we deployed the whole squadron to Saladin. So we were just down the road from Samara, and I was the S1 until sometime in the summer. We had some personnel transition, and I took over as the planner. So I started, and that was what I did for the rest of the deployment. So I didn't take command until June 2005. So It was about 35 months from the time we got to Germany until I took command, which I knew going in, but I wanted to go to Germany. I wanted to go to a Div Cav squadron. I knew that, and that was just the price of it.
Div Cav, man. Div Cav is where I was at.
Yeah.
I mean, your exposure at this point already. I mean, you know, having gone through commander's course, you know, with the Marine Corps, then going to a G level, you know, shop and everything, and then down to a S1. I mean, you're moving all around, getting exposed to all aspects of the military. How you actually shoot, move, and communicate when the time is needed. You know, you got to have the resources, what that takes, how to manage IMTO. I mean, everything.
I felt, and that was the silver lining to waiting that long to take command. By the time I took command, there was nothing surprising. I mean, I felt very ready for command.
Well, you probably were very well networked at that point. Like if you needed staff or needed people, pick up the phone as well, right?
You also had all the experience.
Experience, and all the guys that I was on staff with, we all commanded together when we got back.
Yeah.
So all of the troop commanders and I were either on staff together or they were already in troop command. And it was I wrote a blog for my website a couple weeks ago about this unit in particular. And it was the unit from that point on that I compared everything else to, because it was a very proud organization. It had a lot of history to it. We were the division cavalry squadron. We were the only one in the whole division. So we had responsibilities to do things right. We were the only ones that had our mission. And you couldn't just, it was another one of those examples of, you couldn't just go there on assignment. You had to get vetted. Like you couldn't just go to the Div Cap squadron, at least at that time. So the people were there were high quality and quite honestly, high standards, and we held each other accountable. It was one of the few organizations that I've been a part of that you were truly, if you weren't doing it right, somebody was going to tell you about it. And that made us all better. So it was a great intersection of a lot of great officers and great NCOs and a lot of pride. And a lot of people say the same thing that I do about that organization looking back. And you just expected that's what the Army should be from then on.
So when he's in his Div Cav organization, I'm in mine.
Yeah.
So I'm in 1-7 Cav, Gary Ellen. He's in 1-4 Cav.
Did you know each other at that time frame? Ever met? Yeah.
No, but we're going to start meeting people where we start crossing paths like that later on. But he was in Iraq at the same time that I was in Iraq with my Div Cav. So I was in Baghdad with 1-7. He was in Iraq with 1-4. So there's a lot of these parallels that are running together as far as our careers went.
Yeah, but to your point, Rob, I mean, by that time they were short, but I deployed kind of twice. I'd been with another service and I got 3 years of time as a captain, just learning and maturing, and I needed every bit of it.
Yeah, but those are good times too, right? Yeah. Because I mean, like you just mentioned, you have a wealth of knowledge now. You're not just some young captain that's coming in and taking over a command of which you've not had experience to. Finance issues and challenges with administration, or challenges with logistics, or challenges with training pipelines and getting equipment and going to the field, or what you've had to deal with all of that already up to this point. So it's really set you up now from a command perspective to be able to help the troops from this point forward.
And I was blessed with a fantastic first sergeant. We were talking about him earlier, Steve Zebarth, who he'd spent a lot of time in Schweinfurt, number one, so he knew the area. He had a lot of connections. He was very mature, very smart. I use the mature loosely in case you're listening, Steve. But
he was scout mature.
We clicked immediately. In fact, he had the opportunity to PCS after that deployment. But he said, if we can get paired up as a command team, I'll stay, I'll extend. And he did. And we got paired up together, and we were, I was totally blessed because he was the best first sergeant in the squadron. That came to bite me later because, as it happens, the best first sergeant moves up to the headquarters, and that's what happened. But we just had a great experience, and he taught me so much about training and about tough love and about taking care of soldiers, and we were just a really good combination.
Yeah, wow, what a awesome. Great experience to have for your first sergeant.
Yeah,
experience.
It really was.
He's well known too. Yeah, in a good way.
Yeah, that's great. So after that, what did you end up going after your command time?
So the other flip side to waiting as long as I did for command was they changed the timeline to promotion to major. So I did 15 months of command, which is relatively short. They normally like to give you 18 months in one command or 24 in two. I didn't have time to do two, so I just stayed. Did my 15 months, and then I went to be an OC at JRTC at Fort Polk, at the Joint Readiness Training Center, Fort Polk.
I know that place well.
Woo, don't we all?
Yeah. But I thought was a really good assignment from the perspective. I mean, the location has something to be desired, but using that as a way to learn even more about the Army. And at a time when, so I got there in December of 2006, and right around the time when they announced the surge in Iraq. So from January until, I want to say October, we were humping. I mean, we had brigades just back to back for those 10 months, getting them out the door. So we were really busy getting them ready to go. But there was a certain fulfillment there about giving all you've learned and everything you got for a unit that's getting ready to go on fire. So I enjoyed that part of that assignment.
Did you get to learn about asymmetric warfare and kind of like the introduction, getting to teach that stuff?
Yep. And we had AWG guys around all the time, and I actually got to go to an AWG course in Maryland.
Oh,
the human targeting course.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, that was really cool too. So it was good for me professionally, but I will say that, and this kind of might show up later as we keep talking, but that was when I first started to see signs that of, I don't want to say trauma. It wasn't really trauma, but that deployment in OF2 was not an easy one. We lost, I think, 9 soldiers and a contractor from our squadron. So we lost a lot of dudes. So, building on that Turkey experience where, okay, now I'm kind of feeling with deployments, like now that was the first combat deployment and I was working really hard in that one too. So I had some personal baggage that I was carrying from that, plus, losing a lot of guys. During the deployment, I started to see that show up, not immediately, but looking back on it is when I started to see that.
I'm trying to, so Jeff Morris, does that name sound familiar to you? Did you serve with him? Okay. He wrote a book and we'll talk about it. I'll try to get the information to you and such, but at any rate, he was on the show a couple of times, good friend. And it was kind of the similar timeline. And that's why I was curious.
Yeah.
If you knew that name.
No.
There's a lot going on down there.
Yeah. But we were there for 2 years, almost exactly. And I was getting ready to go to Command and General Staff College at Leavenworth when, I don't want to go through all the details, but I ended up going into an S3 position straight from JRTC. So waited to go to CGSC until later. So I went right from JRTC back to Fort Hood for turn number 2, was a Squadron S3, and then went right back to Iraq in 2009 as a Squadron 3.
Okay.
And that tour at Iraq, we did a year deployment, and then we came back, and I moved up to be the Squadron XO. A Squadron XO less than a year, moved up to be the Brigade XO, and then deployed again in 2011. So we basically went January, December 2009 in Iraq, and then we deployed, I think it was, I forget now when it was. I think it might have been May of 2011.
Wow. So you basically just came back enough time to...
Yeah, so there was like an 8 or 10 year run there where it was either in Iraq or hiring people to go to Iraq, or getting ready myself, or having just come back from Iraq. So
yeah.
And I would have met him down there in 2009 in Iraq again, but then I ended up breaking my neck in that motorcycle accident.
Oh.
That's when 189 Cav was down there from 10th Mountain.
Yeah.
So I was supposed to be down there. We would have met up again, not knowing it.
Right. I was thinking about that when you said 189 earlier, because we had all of those brigades.
We were getting ready to deploy.
And
I was on the way to getting a haircut, broke my neck. So anyway, my story.
Yeah. So ended up doing, I think it was 40 months of major S3XO time. And then and again, like a lot of this stuff, I kind of learned later about how much, I was carrying, and it was a lot. And I'd mentioned the Turkey experience, but it was really when I was a major that I started to learn, because when I came back from Iraq the second time, or might have been when I was doing my Brigade XO time. Brigade XO was not, it's not a fun job. Anybody that's done it will tell you, and working long hours, and, so we had small kids, we lived off post. So I had to get in before the 6 o'clock meeting, before 6:30 PT, not enough time to get home for breakfast. So I'm eating breakfast at my desk, showering at work, same problem at lunch. So I'm eating lunch at my desk. And then, if you don't get out of the office at Fort Hood before, 16:45, you might as well just wait until 1800, because you got the flag and then you got all the traffic leaving post. So I was going full work weeks without seeing my kids. It was, I was exhausted all the time. So by the time that was over, was a really kind of transitional period for my wife and I, when we talked a lot about, okay, we've got to figure out ways to do this differently. Because this ain't working. We weren't doing well. I wasn't, again, it just sucked. I mean, the whole thing just sucked, right? So we spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, how do we keep our family the way we want it and, do the job that I've got to do? And because you feel a lot of pressure that you don't have enough to give to everybody.
Right.
And that's where I felt it was this tension between giving enough to my family, giving enough to work. And, we started to learn a lot about how to set priorities. And for me, it was, it's kind of the first thing I started thinking of, or the first time I really started thinking about daily routines and what that meant, what that looked like, and how to maintain your own energy and presence and be the best version of you so you can be good for your family and for the people at work that you're trying to lead.
Yeah.
So it was a tough time for us, but it was also really enlightening and revealing, and we learned a lot from it. And I'm happy to say that we did learn and put some things in place later.
So where did you end up going after that? Did you end up getting
that's when I went to Newport.
Command time? Okay.
I did. So I did my year at Newport. I got selected for command, but I did another assignment after Newport. I did 2 years at the Pentagon on the Joint Staff.
Oh, okay.
And then
what was that like? I mean,
that was probably my I don't know, crazy is the right word, but it was working at the National Military Command Center, which is loosely the TOC for the Joint Staff.
Yeah.
Because we were the go-to for information for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and for the Secretary of Defense. So whatever is going on in the world, we were staying connected to the different combatant commands to get information and inform, the senior leaders of what's going on. So it was...
nothing too crazy.
Yeah. But I mean, it was another great opportunity to network and also see other branches, coordination, once again, on the battlefield, or at least from a high level, what the battlefield's doing. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it gave you kind of a spectator view of how the most senior leaders of the military and of the nation thought.
Well, and the politics with Congress, yes.
Well, and the politics between the combatant commands.
Well, that's true too.
And, sometimes between the services. I mean, you're right. We were fully integrated. In fact, the team I was on was Operational Team 3. My boss was a Marine 1-star, but we had Air Force and Navy, and, we were fully joint. And we were, we pulled 8-hour shifts, sometimes 12-hour shifts in the NMCC. And, so I was in there when ISIS invaded Iraq. So that was one of those days that sticks out. And, one of the Fort Hood shootings happened when I was on shift. And so things like that were just the ones that were kind of memories of my time there, because it was just not so. I mean, there are a lot of other stories I can't say on the podcast, but it was intense, But what story I will share? So, Rob Riggle.
Yeah. He used to be a Marine, right?
He was a Marine, yeah. And so you'd be pulling midnight shift just like you would in a TOC or wherever else, and there'd be nothing going on. And we were perfectly happy with that. But we had the full suite of comms. You had your not secret and your secret, and then your top secret. And the top secret phone rang, and it was usually something not good. Well, the top secret phone rings when I'm on shift one night, and I answer the phone, and Colonel so-and-so says, "Hey, you guys busy right now?" And I said, "Well, it depends on what you're going to tell me next," but he said, "Well, no, it's nothing like that." He said, "I'm on the chairman's flight, and they're flying from somewhere to somewhere." And he said, "We got the USO tour with us, and they think it's really cool that we can call a Pentagon from this phone." I'm like, "Okay." He's like, "Here, hold on. I'm going to give you Rob Riggle." And he hands the phone to Rob Riggle, and Rob Riggle gets on the phone. And he's like, "Hey, man, what's going on?" I said, "Well, sir, I don't know if I can clear you to tell." I started busting his balls a little bit. And, and I'm looking around, and I tell my boss, I'm like, "Hey, sir," because he's a Marine. I'm like, "Hey, sir, Rob Riggle's on the phone. You want to talk to me?" He said, "No, I don't want to talk to you." Everybody scroll, do an email and do whatever else. So I'm standing there talking to Rob Riggle for like 10 or 15 minutes. And then I get off the phone, I hang it up, and I'm looking around, like waiting for some reaction, and nobody cared.
Yeah.
But just kind of one of the weird things.
Not to mention he called the top secret phone.
Yeah.
Of all the lines that were there.
I think that was the hook. Like,
yeah.
It was. I thought that was pretty cool. So
yeah. So then you end up getting your command time out of it.
Yes. Yeah. So then I
go back to Fort Hood.
No, this one was at Fort Lewis, or Joint Base Lewis McChord.
Yeah.
It was 8th Squadron, 1st Cavalry, so I had a cavalry squadron and 2nd Brigade, 2nd ID, strikers. So, in fact, so I was an armor officer, but the only time I really was on a tank was when I was a lieutenant. So I went to the BRT, so I was on Humvees, and I was in the DivCav squadron. And while I was in command, we transitioned to be the cavalry squadron for 173rd Airborne. So we turned in all our tanks and Bradleys and got parachutes, and so now I'm commanding a striker cavalry squadron, which was cool. I mean, it was like, again, I was always looking for new experiences. So the first time commanding or being in a striker unit, and that was great. And it was the difference at that level was, now when you're the commander, I had a lot of great ideas when I was a major, and the boss was never really doing it right. But now I'm in the seat, and that's when I learned, like, okay, when you're looking at the seat, it's different than being in the seat. And now as the squadron commander, I had to drive the culture, and I had to set the tone, and I created the command climate, and it was all up to me, and nobody else was going to do it. So that was really liberating in some ways. In some ways, the responsibility of that was, you had to have faith that you knew what you were doing, because, very few people were looking to kind of coach you along at that point. You're just expected to do it. So, but we had a great team, me and my command sergeant major Woodlangs. We had a blast.
Did you end up reverting? I'm just curious, because you mentioned when you were a captain, having that first sergeant and being a part of a command that was, very strict and, the whole bit. Did you take that or stuff from that and apply it now as the battalion commander or as squadron commander?
For sure. Yeah. I mentioned this a little bit with Steve Zebarth. He used to say, you've got to be a training animal. So I use that phrase the rest of my career, like, to be a training animal. Like, you had to squeeze every ounce of training opportunity that you could, use every resource you could. And, a lot of people would get discouraged by, well, I've got people on detail, or not everybody's here. Well, train who you got in front of you at the time you got them, because it's going to be worth it. So just train your butt off anytime that you can. So I carried that attitude with me from Steve. And then, so it was like collecting up. I mean, these people, even though they were senior NCOs, they were my mentors too. Mm-hmm. And I took their advice at least as valuable as the, senior leader mentors that I had throughout my career. So I took their lessons with me as well.
What was the op tempo there?
I'm trying to remember when we went to NTC. We went on our NTC rotation, I think about 6 months after I was in command. So that kind of consumed us for the first 6 months or so. We were doing gunnery and lanes and stuff like that. And then after that deployment, we did something, I don't know if they're still doing it. It was called Pacific Pathways, where you would go do a partner exercise. So we got to go to Thailand and Malaysia and train with those units. So like what I was talking about, the SFAB, like I had just done that when the SFAB thing started coming up. I was like, well, that's super cool, because I had a great time training with the Thai and Malaysian armies. So that kind of carried us through. And then, so if you're asking it, we didn't deploy anywhere.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like deployment op tempo,
right,
but we were still pretty busy.
They were starting to slow down.
Yeah. No, but once again, you got a chance, like you had said, to work with partnering forces and see how they operate, share knowledge and the whole bit. And your career has been a lot of, oversight, if you will, command and control, those types of things. Since now you're in a command position and you get that experience once again, you probably felt very comfortable. Whereas other people probably wouldn't be as comfortable in those type of positions, I would think.
Yeah, I don't know. I did feel comfortable, and I was excited for it. And I think having served at that point on the division staff and then, on the joint staff, I kind of knew what Pacific Pathways was all about. We kind of understood what it was for.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting to see the differences between what we did with the Royal Thai Army and what we did with the Malaysian Army, because our relationships with those two countries were different.
Sure.
And the Thais had just we weren't allowed to call it a coup, but it was kind of smelled like a coup not too long before we got there. So there were certain things that we didn't do with them. And then we went to the, with the Malaysian army, and with both of those nations, we were competing for influence with China. So we knew that, and there were certain aspects to what we were doing with each of those countries that reflected that. And I kind of understood that based on, the previous experiences. So, yeah, it was really fun. And having had a lot of deployment experiences, moving the squadron, or it wasn't the full squadron, but it was probably 2/3 of it. It was not too bad.
It was about this time frame that you started getting entertainment from SFAB then. Now, so how did that, you kind of mentioned at the very beginning, but let's cover it again. How was it that you ended up finding more about SFAB? Because it was just starting, of course it was in the Army news everywhere, but I'm just saying more deeper than I think most people. We saw stuff in Army Times and those types of things, but and maybe there wasn't much more information available at that time frame.
There really wasn't.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I got introduced to it was, I saw what everybody else saw.
Yeah.
I was waiting for Army War College results. So Senior Service College,
right.
The word was happening, and I was waiting to find out. I think by the time I got the call by the SFAB, I knew I'd been selected, but I didn't know where I was going. So the slate for where you were going to go hadn't come out yet. So I knew I thought I was going to the Senior Service College after I got out of command. And I got a call from a branch manager, a good friend of mine. He was one of the guys who was a troop commander in 1-4 Cav, Paul Kratiger, called me and said, hey, there's this thing, and we had that conversation. So he told me that what I mentioned before, that I was a candidate for the armor command position in 1st SFAB, and, over the next couple of weeks it would get resolved. And I said, okay, so I was standing by. And then at some point after that, they let me know that General Abrams he was the Force Com CG at the time, and he was going to call me and tell me that I was getting it. So I was in the field, and I had to make sure that I was in a place where, I had to receive a phone call from the general and did all that. So he let me know, and that was spring of 17. Yeah. And then was on my way to Fort Benning to help stand up first SFAB by June of that year.
Sean talked a little bit about this during a recent episode that he probably talked with you about as well, around what it was like to be kind of the original plank holders and trying to stand this thing up when the rest of the Army is trying to figure out why we're even doing this in the first place.
Yeah.
And so it was a very challenging time for you guys, because here you are trying to stand something up that the rest of us didn't quite understand, nor did maybe we appreciate. But fast forwarding, now talking to a lot of especially Special Forces guys, Green Berets, who I think is primarily fifth group that was most upset based on Flash and everything else. Understandable. But but most of those guys that I've talked to since is like, oh man, I was all for it. I mean, when you see those guys in action and everything, they're great. And talking about you guys, the SFABers. But back then,
in all fairness to fifth group, it was mostly retirees, Vietnam War vets, who were giving us the most flack for it.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that. I thought it was active duty guys.
No, there was some of that, but it was mostly retirees. I get it. I understand where they were coming from, but the manner in which we were getting feedback, if you will, was unpleasant.
Social media, I mean, they were trying to destroy you guys.
I had some private conversations over social media with some of them and told them what I thought about it, and I really tried to resist it. And that was and Sean might remember, that was my message, like, hey, just don't engage. And even I was like, I can't just let this go, because they were crapping all over our soldiers who are only doing what the Army is asking them to do.
Yep.
And we didn't choose to wear a beret, and we didn't choose the color, and none of that. We were just doing our jobs.
You didn't ask to be called Legionnaires. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So
the Legion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to your point, I mean, when we went to Afghanistan, we had a great relationship with the ODAs that rotated through Dalkey, and they were, the whole reason we were there is to lighten some of their load, and we did that. So it all ended up fine. Yeah.
And we had a different experience. Our deployment was different than follow-on experiences. because we didn't know what we didn't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we showed up and I told them we were doing planning on MRE boxes and dry erase board. And we're all sitting around, and that's how you're doing it. And then eventually you get a table, and then eventually,
right?
You know, and we had the horse blanket, the big calendar that get taped up on the wall. You remember that?
Yes.
Taped up. And Bolyard and I'd just be looking at that thing, picking that thing apart, name by name, line by line. I mean, just old school analog planning. Meanwhile, you've got all this stuff in the background telling you how much you suck, and you don't know what you guys are doing. They're like, hey, we're deploying in 6 months. You ready? No. Okay, that's cool.
And it was there was a period when it was going to be less than that.
Yeah.
When we were going to have to man, train, equip,
Yep.
get everybody out the door in just a handful of months, and then that got changed, thankfully. To again, I deployed on Valentine's Day for the second time.
We were at JRTC. We didn't have a patch.
Yeah,
I told you guys that.
Yeah.
Walking through the PX, after a break, and I'd have a young NCO come up and go, hey, Sergeant Major, you're missing your unit patch.
Yeah.
Thanks, young guy.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Yeah, but
I tell this storyline too, and I don't think you were there. I think it was just command teams, but we had one of our meetings with General Milley, and before we even got there, we had been told we were going to be 1st Squadron, 38th Cavalry. So I did all this research on 138, and I even talked to like a World War II veteran from 138. Based on that conversation, I was like, our call sign's going to be Lucky.
Never heard of this.
Yeah.
I mean, none of this.
They were like in the 100th Division.
Okay.
I'm probably saying
old school.
And then they were part of the Brigade, I can't remember, battlefield surveillance brigades. They used to be part of the Corps. It was a thing that was brief, but it was 138, 238, 338. So there were some guys who had deployed as part of 138 Cav I got connected with. So there's this whole thing. So we're in a meeting, and we've got the name tents with our unit on it and whatever. And General Milley walks in, and he's looking at it. He says, where'd you get these unit designations? And we said, I don't know, Department of Heraldry. He's like, I don't like that. We're going to change that. So, I mean, we had hats and shirts and
they came up with, we had
this whole
somebody
thing
professionally designed the emblem with the horse head and the clover. And I mean, I still got the design.
Yeah. I still got shirts and hats and everything. So yeah, but that's such a revealing story about the experience in first SFAB, because it was just stuff like that, one after the other. And what could you do? You just kind of rolled with it. And that was when so we were in the same meeting, and one of the problems we were having was, as is usually the case, right? The big boss says one thing, and somewhere in the middle, it gets watered down, or people get resistant, or they don't think it's they just kind of, they're willfully disobedient, or whatever their reason is, and you don't get the result that the big boss man intends. So General Milley's hearing about all this from us, and we knew we had an MTO. And Tim throws out there to General Milley, like, hey, sir, it'd be great if we had an MTO. He's like, and General Milley's like, I want to talk to Abrams. And he's like rattling off all the names of these 4-star generals that he needs to have a come to Jesus with. And, because Tim threw that, hand grenade out there in the middle of the meeting. It was pretty awesome.
And you have to understand Tim's demeanor.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a West Virginia demeanor, just like big, tall. He just had a presence, and I could just see him throwing it out there with all the confidence in the world.
Biggest manhole cover I saw thrown at somebody.
Yeah.
How many years did you end up spending with SFAB then?
2.
Okay.
Yeah. So summer of 17 to May of 19.
When did you put pin on 06 then?
Same day I changed out of command.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't remember. I think the date was a little bit before that, but because it was so close, I had family come down, and we just scheduled both for the same day. So they were there. They were able to see the change of command and the promotion. And then after that, I left. That's when I went to California for the War College Fellowship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How was that?
It was great.
I mean, Stanford, totally different.
It was. And the unique thing about the Hoover Institution is that it resides on the Stanford campus, but it's only loosely affiliated with the university. But it interestingly, it's a relatively conservative institution on the really liberal campus.
Mm-hmm.
But you had people there like Mattis and McMaster. George Schultz was still coming to work every day, 99 years old.
Wow.
the convening power that they had at that place, they would bring in just people from history and economics, and Condoleezza Rice is the director there now, but she came in as a visitor more than once. But we got to be a fly on the wall of a lot of those conversations and got to hear George Shultz speak. And each one of the fellows, there was one other Army fellow. I think there were 8 of us total. There was a Department of State guy, a couple Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, and we each would do our story. Like, here's the Army, or here's the Army through my experience, whatever. So I remember very distinctly in the room where I was doing this talk, and there were chairs set up, and right in the aisle between the 2 sections of chairs was George Shultz sitting in his wheelchair, like hanging on every word, and he was the first one to ask a question when I got done. I mean, it was just incredible. I mean,
surreal.
Just to interact with.
Did you get a master's degree or another master's degree from there?
No, I didn't.
Some guys did, though.
Some of those programs you do get a master's, and if I'd gone to one of those sisters, I mean, some of them would have been degree producing. But at that point, I mean, I had done a master's on my own time, and then I got one from the Naval War College, so I was good. Like, I didn't need another degree. And that was one of the reasons why I thought that would be a good option, because I don't need to get another degree. I just want to be a part of that. And I had friends who had gone to that fellowship and talked to a bunch of people, but it was fantastic.
No, it sounds like it. And after that, where did you end up going then?
That's when I went to Brigade Command.
Okay.
So I left that fellowship and then went into Brigade of 2nd Brigade, 1st Cav, Blackjack, back at Fort Hood. So that was turn 3 at Fort Hood. And I was telling Sean about this earlier, that I took command in summer of 2020. And at the time, I don't know if you remember everything that was happening with Vanessa Guillen at Fort Hood. She was a young soldier who was murdered.
This is wild.
Yeah, I mean, so she had gone missing but hadn't been found yet.
Yes.
Yeah.
The George Floyd thing had happened that year, so there was all the social justice tension and riots and all of that stuff was going on. COVID was 6 months old, and the brigade that I took command of was still redeploying from Europe when I took command. So I was welcoming planes, a day into command from Europe. Hey, I'm welcome home. I'm your new brigade commander.
Wow.
So there was a lot going on, and subsequent, all of that stuff happened subsequent to Vanessa Guillen being discovered, and then there were investigations on what happened with that, and then those grew to investigations about command climate at Fort Hood, and that kind of encompassed the first 6-8 months of command, and that was challenging.
Well, that whole time period, I think from that point forward, Fort Hood started being under a microscope.
Very much so. Very much so.
For not just that incident. It just seemed like another incident, Fort Hood, another incident, Fort Hood.
Well, when you have, congressional and senior Army leaders standing outside the gates of Fort Hood saying, hey, there's something in the water and we need to hold these leaders accountable. I mean, it was the world, us against the rest of the world. I mean, in fellow brigade commanders and I would talk about that. It just felt like we were back to back in a bar brawl where we're just, everything is, like you said, under a microscope. And it's tough to get any traction in any unit, and it just felt unfair. Not because of the timing of it, but because it was. Don't get me wrong. What happened to Vanessa Guillen was an absolute tragedy and horrifying, and her family was justified and rightfully upset about what happened to her. It just, when it became about Fort Hood and there's something different about Fort Hood and something bad about Fort Hood, that's when I really was like, this is unfair. And I never felt personally that, that anyone came to our defense. Mm-hmm. We had a lot of senior leaders who were either relieved or suspended, pending investigations. And at the end of the investigations, they were found not at fault of anything, but then weren't allowed to go back into command. I mean, it was just one thing after another like that for the first, like I said, 6 or 8 months of command. So that was tough to deal with. And brigade command is different than battalion command. I mean, it's a much bigger organization, and driving the culture it's just that much more difficult. So
absolutely, when
these young soldiers were hearing about how bad it was at their duty station, it's hard not to believe it. So they're looking for reasons to there's Fort Hood again, and everything that happens becomes, even though most of the stuff that was happening everywhere. Not that it was necessarily good, but it wasn't particularly Fort Hood.
Yeah, it wasn't nuanced to just Fort Hood. It just happened to be,
right.
That's where the spotlight was at.
Right.
Like command isn't hard enough.
Right. So it was really stressful, and I'm happy to say that we did kind of come out of that, and I did learn a lot about leading a large organization and how you lead in crisis and how you. But our message was always not to, a lot of people say block out the noise. I mean, that's unrealistic. In this day and age, people are going to hear about what the world is saying about it, but we're better than that. We're great because of who we are and how we treat one another. And I can't do anything about what people are saying, but we can do something about what we're doing here. And let's just focus on each other and being the strongest team and building relationships and creating trust. And, over time that was able to win out. To get us past that period, I'm happy to say. So
yeah, wow, that had to be challenging. Like I said, with the microscope that was going on there, it just seems like the media was feeding off of it, but I think there were also a lot of military influencers that were also latching on to that. I don't know whether it was feeding their people that were listening and following them or whatever, and it just kept. Every time, I'll be honest with you, I was watching it and wondering what the hell is in the water? What is going on out there? And it definitely had to be a challenging time for you as a leader. But I think, it was also a different period. I was going to ask you about Fort Lewis and then now here. We were in a period of drawdown to where we're getting the transition back to being pre-war, which, you were a young officer of, which is very different in a garrison environment than it is into a constant combat role, or rotation, I should say. So you were also getting soldiers who had to get used to, no, you have to think differently and everything else, because we're not going to be training and gearing up to go and deploy and then come back and do that cycle over again.
That was honestly one of the biggest challenges, because at the middle leadership level, they had not known that Army that you were just talking about.
Yeah.
So I call it institutional busyness. Everybody, we're doing things all the time, like they were going to get called up, next month to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And I had to be the one that was like, no, we're good. We're not, we will get plenty of notice before we have to go do something in it. And there's a time and a place to ramp it up. But when you don't have to ramp it up, take advantage of those opportunities. And we were fortunate enough. Again, I didn't deploy in command, in brigade command either. So we had 2 full years to set some systems to more reflect what the late 90s, early 2000s Army looked like, where there were training cycles and establishing a green, amber, red cycle. So when you were training, and when you were not, you were helping others to be able to train by pulling details and doing whatever else. But putting those systems in place, and also little things. I mean, Sean, you remember this. This is, I think, the greatest example I have of this was when I was a lieutenant, it was every Thursday at 1500, you cleared out family time. You had to leave work, and people were, you were getting letters of
concern.
Yeah. You were getting in trouble
if
you didn't have your soldiers gone by 1500 on Thursday. So I remember that. And now it was at 1500 on Friday. Same deal. And I was watching nobody leave work at 1500. So I was asking, the battalion commanders, like, why aren't we not sending everybody home like we're supposed to? I mean, this is a core installation policy. Like, why are we not doing that? I don't know. Nobody recognized it. I said, well, we're changing that this week. 1500, I went, everybody gone. And then, it was the weirdest thing. It was like I was telling everybody to go home, and we couldn't get ourselves to go home at 1500 on Friday. It was crazy. So I started driving around to the battalion commanders' parking spots at 1501 and taking pictures of their cars in their parking lots as I was going home and sending it to them. And they were like, okay, I got it. But it got to the point where I was going down to company command posts and stuff like that. I'm like, why are you still here? I mean, it was crazy. But I tell that story because it's a reflection of that mindset. Like, we got to just keep doing and doing it. And you could see the burnout. And I was telling Sean about what I saw from the brigade when they came back from Europe. I mean, they had full train up, deployment. Half of that deployment was on COVID lockdown. So they were wore out, and you could see it in the units. You could just feel it. So it was like, okay, well, we're not deploying right now. Okay, let's put some systems in place and let's take care of ourselves a little bit. So then when it does come time, we can ramp it up and we'll feel good about it. So it was one of the most bizarre things that I had to be so draconian about people leaving.
Yeah. But it's a lot of, like you said, junior leaders didn't have to be a leader in that time frame. Right. And it's very challenging, because I can remember those days where, you had a lot of downtime. You had a lot of times where you had to create, or modify busy work into being something where it felt like you were training or doing something of importance.
Right.
And we had a lot of NCO time, officer time. We created those types of things so that we can make sure soldiers' health and welfare was being taken care of and such. So, now that we're back into that, and we've been in that for a longer period of now, probably more like some units 7-8 years now, the Army's having to adjust to that a lot more, of that garrison type, what I call garrison, type of military. Still not the way it was back in the day, where you had to have spit-shine boots and starch. Right. Now it's wash and wear and everything else, but you know what I'm talking about. It's just a very different military environment.
There's a difficulty there, and he alluded to it. The mindset of the senior leader that's been their entire livelihood for 20 years has been war, trying to influence them,
whether in it or preparing for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The younger soldiers don't know. So you're starting to see a lot less combat patches, and when these senior leaders have it, it's hard to get us to change that mindset that we constantly need to be ready for the next day.
And it needed you to do that. It needed someone like you to just go, hey, wait just a minute. Now that we're in a garrison type of environment, you're absolutely right. The time to actually deploy is going to be a long lead time. It's not going to be instant.
Yeah.
Unless you're in the 75th Ranger Regiment, 82nd, 173rd, or JSOC or SOCOM or something. You're basically going to have a long lead time to prepare for that opportunity.
Well, and part of my point was, in opposition to, a DRF or somebody that's got to be on the airfield in 18 hours, like those are rotating cycles too, but it takes a lot more to deploy an armored brigade combat team than some of those lighter units. So when you're in it, you're 1 year, let's say your 9-month deployment to Europe is a year and a half.
Yeah.
Because of all the things you've got to do extra on the front end and on the back end. So when you're on a 2-year rotation, you really don't have a lot of time in between there where you're either not recovering from or getting ready for the next one. So my point to everybody was, invest in that bank while you can, because I'm going to draw it out from you when it comes time to get ready to go. So right now, you just came off a deployment, so take your birthday off. Go to the kids' soccer game. Like, do those things now while you can, because I'm not going to let you later on. And the Chief of Staff of the Army at the time had a great chart that I use as part of my initial counseling, and I still use it in some respects when I'm doing consulting. Is it's like a timeline, and on the top it has work, and or on the top was family, and the bottom was work. And on one side it was war, and one side it was, peace or not war.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that you would be doing on each one of those sides of that line that you had the opportunity to do on this end, the peace end, because you did not have the opportunity on the full out war end. So take advantage when you can, because you're not always going to have that opportunity. It wasn't just about like, hey, we're just going to relax because we're not going anywhere. The mindset was, hey, we're still going to work, but we're going to have limits. We're going to have boundaries, because your investment in yourself and in your family is important. And you have the opportunity right now to do that. Whereas later on, we're going to take that opportunity away the closer we get to going somewhere.
Yeah.
So
striking the right balance.
Right.
Let's face it, the Army probably at the later stage of before going to 9/11 happening and everything else was probably getting a little bit too lax, quite frankly. And now setting that right tone going forward. This is about the time frame then that you made the transition. So I want to jump into that. What was that like for you, and what advice would you give back to the individuals that are about to transition? A year away, 2 years away.
Well, I did one more job after that.
Okay.
I was the 3rd Corps Chief of Staff for a year.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
At Hood.
Yeah, at Hood. So we stayed at Hood for another year. And I didn't expect to transition when I did. I lost both my parents and my father-in-law within a 5-week period in my transition from Brigade Command to being the Corps Chief of Staff.
Oh my gosh, man, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was, I mean, it's surreal, and it's still surreal when I say it out loud, but it was awful, right? It was just the worst thing I've ever experienced in such a short period of time. And that really kind of set the tone for where I was mentally and emotionally going into that job, which is not an easy job. It was really taxing. So that was kind of the context for setting the tone for when I decided to transition. So I was doing the Corps Chief of Staff job and was having discussions about what my next job was going to be after that. And by the time I left, that Chief of Staff job would be about the time I was starting to really get looked at for promotion to 1-star. So that next job was kind of an indicator of the possibilities of whether that was going to happen or not, or whatever.
Yeah.
So that was really where my mindset was for most of the time. And then it was sometime over the holidays, over Christmas, I think it was in January, I really started thinking about it seriously. And I just felt done, right? And people will tell you, when you know, and I knew.
And what was the time frame from the time you lost your family members to this?
6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've had a time to reflect.
Yeah.
To make the transition into the new role, but also to reflect on total career. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was not just the next job.
Mm.
If I had taken the next job, it probably meant really I was signing up for another 4 or 5 years at a minimum.
Okay.
And probably 3 moves in that 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And it was just the thought of doing that while everything, and we saw the impacts of, we felt it. Obviously my wife and I were going through it too, but with the kids, and kids were going to college, but we still had young ones. And that was a consideration that most people in my position didn't have. Most guys at my age or that stage in their career were either empty nesters or getting closer to it. Their kids were teenagers. And we still had, at the time, 5-year-old and 8-year-old.
But your eldest was probably in high school at this time frame?
She was in college.
College,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah, she was in college. So we had a big family that we had to consider. We had to consider kind of where we were both at. But once I opened it up as a conversation, we both kind of knew it was time. And it took me about a week to kind of really say it out loud that it was time.
Yeah.
But then when I did it, I didn't look back. That would be my first piece of advice is if you feel like own it and never look back. And I fortunately had a lot of leaders who, didn't question it, and they understood what I'd been going through, and they respected my decision. And I never got any browbeating. And I've had peers who've had this happen where they're like, what, you can't do another assignment? They get guilt tripped for wanting to retire. And I didn't get any of that, gratefully. But I would say, once go for it. And the reason I say that is because I also have other people that I know that I've served with who just continue to hang on.
Yeah.
Right. With the hope that they're going to get the next promotion or the next assignment, or they get to 28 or 30 or whatever else, and they're miserable and they're not doing the work they think they're doing, or they're just unhappy. And I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to do that to myself or my family, and just decided that, okay, this is it. So once you decide, go for it. I had a little bit of an unorthodox transition because I had pretty quickly had a job lined up. So that eased a lot of that tension where I really compressed my timeline. So I submitted my papers by late January, and we were rolling off of Fort Hood by the end of August, and I was retired by November. So I had a pretty short timeline. Not everybody has that, right? Not everybody has a ready-made job ready to go. So I don't speak to that, but the job I took was kind of the perfect transition job that I could have taken. It was doing something that I enjoyed in a low-threat environment, in a place that we've come to love. We really love living in Lexington, and so consider What I'm building up towards here is I've also seen peers just transition the pain that they're going through as a senior leader in the Army into a transition job. Mm-hmm. And they're miserable doing that. They're making a bunch more money, but that's the only thing that they're thinking about, rather than, hey, what's this impact on me? What's the impact on my family? Am I happy? Like, do something that you can enjoy. I mean, and I can say that because, having retired as a colonel at 26 years, that changes the dynamics of what I have to or don't have to do in retirement. And I'm fully grateful for that. But I saw people even with that same, situation still, going for that brass ring. Yeah. And no, I don't want to talk about other people's experiences.
But it's tough because you get a lot of influence from, the LinkedIn's of the world, and
right.
And seeing, what your partners are doing to your left, and you see contemporaries that are out there pushing you. Oh yeah, man. I mean, you're getting
it's there for you.
Yeah, you could be a VP someplace. I mean, that takes.
One of my pre-command course instructors said it best, I think, when he said, when you retire as a colonel, you can absolutely get a $200,000 a year job. But guess what? They're going to expect $200,000 a year work from you. Yeah. So if that's what you want, know that's what you're signing up for.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that. Yeah. I wanted to enjoy my family. I wanted to, all the family dynamics we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Been able to have that because I didn't jump into something that was going to keep me as busy or more than what I was doing as the third Corps chief.
Good on you, though, Ian, for knowing who you are and making that transition and owning that. I can tell you, I thought I understood that when I made the transition. As an E8, I had the opportunity to go to the academy, and I wasn't interested in doing that because it meant at least 3 different moves. And for me, it would have been 1 to the academy, 1 to a PCS, and then 1 somewhere else where I was going to live, because it wasn't going to be where they last assigned me,
Right.
So, I had a daughter in high school. For me, that's why I asked you that question, but you in that similar situation. But, for me, I was driven. I still wanted to go, if it wasn't in the military, I wanted to do it in the private sector. And so I did go hard. And what you did is you figured out very early on that no, that's not what you wanted to do. And it's more about work-life balance. It's about putting your priorities now into perspective. It's about finding things that your passion, your purpose, those types of. A lot of us don't figure that out. We think we have it figured out, but then we don't figure that out for a couple of years. So, kudos to you for doing that.
And I'll point back to those earlier experiences that we talked about before. Yeah. I mean, that experience as a major and 40 months of KD time and 2 deployments, and that woke me up to all of those other things. And I knew that I was going to be that guy that, they always talk about at the end of your career, who's standing next to you, because that's who you've got the rest of your life. And if I hadn't made some changes then, and then made the decision to retire when I did, I knew that's where I was headed. What are you going to be at the expense?
What do you go ahead.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think it's a good segue. Talk about what you're doing right now.
I want to hear that you said consulting, so I want to hear a bit about that.
So I worked for a company for about 2 years coming out of retirement doing leadership consulting. So did leadership training, individual one-on-one development, team development, taught some classes, and that was good. I decided in the fall to start my own business doing similar things and focused on athletics. I got some exposure to doing athletics leadership consulting in that job, and that's where I wanted to specialize. So I started Ian Palmer Leadership in October, and now I'm working out of the house and doing my own thing, which is really good. So what I'm doing is I'm layering on top of specifically athletics coaches, all the leadership training and experience and all that was fortunate to have in the Army, on top of their knowledge of X's and O's.
Still very applicable. You're trying to build young men and help them, or women, but if you're working with football or sports and stuff, it's team building, it's management and leadership. Who's going to step up? Who's going to be the person that's going to influence other people in a positive way? All of the aspects that we learn.
My stock answer for the question when I was on active duty, what would you do if I would be a coach? And it's for all the reasons you just pointed out. Yeah. It's about trust. It's about cohesion. It's about culture. It's about hard training. It's about discipline. The overlaps are everywhere between athletics in the military. And I point back to what I was talking about before. I joined the military, I think, because I was an athlete growing up, and it appealed to me, and the sense of team and camaraderie and all that. So now I have an opportunity to kind of overlay that for people in the athletics world, and it's really exciting.
Wow, that to me, that's like a perfect transition for you. From, like you said, because it's so close, and then you're very passionate about leadership, it sounds like. So that's another aspect. All the background that you had of working with other force, to me, like that gives you an overview of working with different types of sports, working with different, maybe even division levels, and challenges they may have. You got one football coach that has it great, has a big office, and has a huge staff of 100 people, and you got the other one that's out there painting the lines on the field.
Right. Well, and it's. I think the insights are there because leadership's leadership, right? It's about people, and that's what I used to say. I've continued to say as a consultant is I don't care what you do, leadership is about the people. So whatever arena you find yourself, like there's a way for leaders to contribute. So that's one aspect of it, but also like organization, like how do you organize your staff? How do you do feedback? There's so many other applications of what we did in the service that apply in the athletics world, in the corporate world for that matter. But I'm spending more time doing athletics, although I'm still doing some corporate work. But the parallels are there, and it's really just about how much that leader wants to invest in him or herself and their team. That it makes a lot of difference. But
if somebody's listening to this that is in that world, how do they get in contact with you?
My website is ianpalmerleadership.com, and from there is linked. I've got all the socials, but and I'm searchable on LinkedIn.
Add it in the profile.
Yeah. We'll try to put it in the show notes as well.
Wherever I'm pointing.
Yeah, I try to keep it easy. ianpalmerleadership.com, and from there you can get to. I'm pretty responsive on all the platforms, and been putting out a lot of content lately just to try to generate some interest. So we'll see where it goes. But I am really passionate about it, and I feel like it's a calling because of what I felt like my strengths were as a leader in the Army, and my passion for sports, and being able to get in that world a little bit over the last couple of years just kind of kindled that. So
I think that it's something that is very relatable, but also a challenge that's going on with the NIL, and everything. There's only so much dollars that you can actually spend, or, the challenges that go with that, and trying to keep teams together when they know that some players are getting paid more than others, and all the dynamics that go with that. I mean, those are all the aspects that you can bring to the table. And like you said, leadership is leadership. It's only good leadership. If you have bad leadership, it means you don't have leadership.
Right.
So, bringing that to the table and bringing your experiences has got to be terrific. Man, I really appreciate Ian, you coming in here. Thanks, Sean, for bringing Ian in here.
Yeah. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you coming and spending all this time with us and sharing your knowledge.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate for what you all do too.
Yeah, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Rob.
Love you, man.
I love you too, brother.